Hello, ghosts and ghouls. Welcome back to another episode of Coffee and Cryptids. My name is Morticia Evermort. Every week, I post a new video about a beloved cryptid and drink coffee because I love coffee and I love cryptids. So come on this weird journey with me. If this is your first time watching, I'm posting a definition of what a cryptid is in the description below, in case you're wondering what the actual that means. So let's go ahead and dive right into the story. The year is 1952 in rural West Virginia in a small town by the name of Flatwoods. We're talking tiny, we're talking 300 occupants. On a late summer evening, around 7:15 p.m., just after dusk, 3 young boys were playing some football outside on the lawn of Flatwoods Elementary School. 2 brothers, Edward and Freddie May, and their friend, Tommy Heyer. The school was just right down the street from the Mays house. The 3 of them saw a bright white light streak across the sky like a comet, but it looked like it landed in the town. And of course, this being a very small town, they had a pretty good assumption of where it landed. Somewhere around the hillside of G. Bailey Fisher's farm, which was about a quarter mile from the Mays house. Edward, Freddie, and Tommy absolutely lost their minds at the sight of this light comet thing crashing into the ground and went running back to the Mays house to tell their mother, Kathleen, what they had seen. Kathleen was worried that it could have been an airplane that had crashed. This was 1952. The Soviet Union had only just tested the atomic bomb like a handful of years before this occurrence. Valid concern, Kathleen, valid. Morbid curiosity, I think, will forever be one of my favorite human traits. G. Bailey Fisher's farm was about a quarter of a mile from the Mays house, so Kathleen and the 3 boys decided to walk over to the farm. They stopped to get reinforcements along the way. 3 other kids accompanied them. Among them were Neil Nunley, Ronnie Shaver, and Eugene Lemon. Eugene also happened to be a West Virginia National Guardsman at just 17 years of age. Eugene brought his dog Richie with him. If I was Eugene, I probably would have brought my dog too. I think that dogs have a much better sense about supernatural occurrences than humans do. We don't listen. Kathleen, Edward, Freddie, Tommy, Neil, Ronnie, Eugene, and Richie were almost to the top of the hill where G. Bailey Fisher's farm was located when Richie ran ahead barking, probably to warn them they might die. Moments later, Richie came running back down the hill at full speed ahead with his tail between his legs whimpering. We're not off to a good start here. When the group reached the top of the hill, the first thing they noticed and commented to each other was that there was a thick, pungent mist that had a metallic smell in the air, making it hard to see anything. Their eyes started to water, their noses started to burn, but they kept hearing high-pitched noises from the other side of the woods and had to know where it was coming from or if somebody was hurt. So with fearless Eugene, the West Virginia National Guardsman, leading their group, they continued on in the dark. Neil saw a red pulsing light that resembled a fireball in the distance. Eugene pointed his flashlight to where Neil was pointing. But then Eugene noticed, to the left of that, 2 bright lights that looked like eyes in a tree to the left. So he pointed his light over in that direction. It was hard to make out what they were seeing, with their eyes watering and their noses burning, and the thick mist with the mustard gas consistency in the air. But in the distance, they could just make out the shape of a tall, man-like figure. They rubbed at their eyes and squinted to see what was out there. As it became more clear, it was massive. Closer to this thing, the metallic smell was so much stronger. Eugene's light must have startled the creature because it started hissing, a high, shrill hiss, like it was shrieking at them. There was a thumping noise, and suddenly it was coming at them fast. Kathleen said it looked like it was gliding because it was moving so unnaturally fast towards them. As the figure approached, they could see this creature was at least 10 feet tall, with a round red face, with bulging, glowing eyes, surrounded by a pointed head that resembled an ace of spades. It had what looked like dark green metal armor in the shape of a dress on its lower body. The eyes glowed an eerie orange color, huge and unhuman. Kathleen saw that it had tiny claw-like hands folded over the front of its torso. For a split second, they were frozen in terror as it approached them rapidly. The creature turned sharply to the side and headed toward the red, pulsing light like a fireball. Eugene screamed, dropping his flashlight, and fell backwards. One of the younger boys peed his pants. I'm not gonna lie, guys. I think I would have peed my pants too. All 7 of them were screaming in absolute terror as they fled down the side of the hill and did not stop running until they were safely back in Kathleen's house. The creature had been headed straight towards them, looming above them at 10 feet tall, with glowing orange, creepy eyes and that red, round face behind a spade-shaped head, shrieking, screaming at them, and then suddenly just gone. The first thing Kathleen does when she gets home is call the local sheriff, Robert Carr, to tell him what had happened. She wasn't sure the sheriff would believe her, so she also called the local reporter, Mr. Stewart, who happened to be the co-owner of the Braxton Democrat. What the group of 7 experienced that night would become known as the Flatwoods Monster. Sheriff Carr had already been out investigating reports of a crashed aircraft, so he went over to the Fisher farm to investigate what Kathleen had said they saw. Mr. Stewart, on the other hand, went straight to Kathleen's house to interview a few of the eyewitnesses. He said that those people were the most scared people he had ever seen. He said people don't make up that kind of story that quickly. Mr. Stewart marched up the hill with a shotgun, grabbing the farmer from the Fisher farm along the way to investigate for himself. Sheriff Carr, Mr. Stewart, and the farmer all confirmed smelling the pungent metallic odor at the site when they arrived. Later, the sheriff and deputies would deny any claim that they smelled anything or saw anything out of the ordinary. In Mr. Stewart's article, he said that it was a sickening, burnt, metallic odor that prevailed. This Flatwoods monster was 10 feet in height, with a round, red face and orange, glowing, eerie eyes. But none of the 3 men saw this creature or the red, pulsating light that looked like a fireball. A woman at the Fisher farm said that at the approximate time of the crash, her entire house shook violently and her radio wouldn't work for 45 minutes. Early the next morning, Mr. Fisher decided to go back out to the site to see if he could find any further clues in the light of day. He found 2 tracks like skid marks in the mud, as well as an odd, gummy deposit. This was also later described as an oily residue with bits of rubbery substance. Immediately, he was thinking, this has got to be a UFO, and reported the track marks as a potential saucer landing site. He knew the area didn't have any regular car traffic, so the only explanation was that it was a UFO. UFO enthusiast groups definitely agreed. Most of the 7 people that encountered the Flatwoods Monster on the evening of September 12th were violently ill the next day and for many days following that. They had headaches with nausea and vomiting. It's also good to note that the symptoms these people were experiencing are a common side effect of mustard gas. And it makes you wonder, is that what was up on that hillside that was like a thick fog that smelled so awful? Later on, a local boy by the name of Max Lockard admitted to driving around the farm in his Chevy truck, hoping to see something, anything, which would explain the tracks. But later, paranormal investigators concluded that the tracks, oily residue, and bits of rubbery substance must have been left by the creature and not the truck. Mr. Stewart knew his alien stuff. This encounter blew up. It made the radio. Dozens of newspapers, both local and national, ran this. People freaking loved aliens in the 1950s. The next thing you know, the U.S. Air Force has sent an investigator. During the 1950s, the U.S. Air Force had a special project called Project Blue Book that investigated UFO sightings. Their explanation? It was just an owl. You might want to believe it was just an owl like Project Blue Book explained. I'm sure it's a possibility if you think about a screech owl sitting in a tree in the dark with a flashlight being shined on it. But I personally think that's a bit of a stretch. As a side note, Project Blue Book had 1,501 reported UFO sightings just in the year 1952. Wild, right? The sightings and strange phenomena didn't stop there. If it had, then yeah, maybe it was the owl. The very next day, September 13th at 6:30 in the morning, the local director of the Board of Education reported seeing a flying saucer take off. That same day around dusk, George and Edith Snitowski were driving in their car with their 18-month-old son. They were driving near Strange Creek, about 20 miles from Flatwoods. They were driving on a road in a rural area on Route 4 between Clay and Braxton County. Suddenly, their car died. They had just had the battery replaced, so it didn't make sense why their car would die out of the blue. But George got out to see if he could get the car going again. George wasn't having any luck getting the car started again. It was dark and the road was deserted. So he got back in the car to talk with Edith about what their next move would be. Suddenly, their baby starts crying as their car fills with a putrid, sulfurous smell. They could see that there was something glowing up the road that looked like a globe, so George got out to investigate. As he walks closer to it, he can see that the globe is hovering off the ground, seeming to shift back and forth slightly, and the color of the glow is a soft violet. George takes another step and begins to feel thousands of tiny needle-like vibrations on his skin. George is feeling very sick and turns to stumble back towards the car. He takes a few steps, looking up to see his wife in the car, screaming and pointing that something is following him. Something huge. George said it was 10 feet tall, with a large, bloated body, long, spindly arms, and a huge head gliding rapidly towards them. George races to the car and gets safely inside. From inside the car, George and Edith can see that the creature's face looks reptilian in nature and very bony. It seems to have dark metal armor on its lower body. as George and Edith sit frozen in terror in their car. The creature drags its lizard-like hand across the hood of the car. They hoped the creature would get bored and leave on its own. It's not like they had a whole lot of options. I don't think getting out of the car and running with an 18-month-old baby down a deserted road would have been the better option in that case. I'm not sure. Eventually, the creature did get bored and leave. When the creature was gone, so was the violet glowing globe that had been in the road up ahead. As soon as the monster was out of sight, their car miraculously starts and they're able to speed away quickly to safety. George later told his story to Mail magazine in 1955. This encounter is similar to that of the original encounter of the Flatwoods Monster. Some details are different, but then again, the original group did not get anywhere near as close as George and Edith got to this creature. A week later, a woman and her grown daughter were driving down the road near the Fisher farm when a bright, blinding light came out of nowhere and they were forced to stop their car because they couldn't keep driving. With the bright light came a thick mist and a foul odor like rotten eggs. Suddenly, they saw some kind of creature on a floating device coming towards them. The creature was huge, at least 10 feet tall. It looked like it was wearing some kind of robotic suit or spacecraft of some kind on its body, almost like an armored structure of some kind with thick vertical pipes on it. In the light of day, they could see that it had a cowl behind its head in the shape of an ace of spades that was sitting behind a round red head. Its eyes were like portholes that were glowing an eerie green orange. The eyes were the size of $50. The creature's device landed on their car, leaving a V-shaped burn where it had touched. The mother's 21-year-old daughter was so badly affected by this encounter that she had to be hospitalized for 3 weeks. Now, there are people who say that they agree that it was just an owl, or that their fear and anxieties were heightened in the situation, and that's what caused them to see the things that they claimed that they saw. The people of West Virginia, however, will tell you they know the difference between an owl and a creature from outer space. There is a theory that the Flatwoods Monster was created as a way to increase tourism and revenue in the small town of Flatwoods after hearing about reports of the Mothman and the type of tourism money that the small town of Point Pleasant was raking in off of Mothman. I think it's easy to say, if you've listened to my first video, that that is definitely not accurate, because the Mothman sightings and the big tourism stuff didn't start happening until 1956. The Flatwoods Monster was 10 feet tall with a round red face and eerie, bulging, glowing orange eyes surrounded by a pointed head that resembled the shape of an ace of spades. The dark, metallic-looking armor, possibly dark green, in the shape of a dress. Another sighting of the creature, similar to the Flatwoods Monster, was reported by Audra Harper a week before the incident at the Fisher farm. Audra was walking in the woods near her home in Heaters, which is about 5 miles north of Flatwoods. Audra and her friend were walking to a nearby store, but they were taking a shortcut through the woods because the main roads were really hard to walk on, and it was just much easier to try and walk through the woods. About a half-mile into their walk, they noticed a ball of fire on one of the hills. Audra didn't think much of it, assuming it was one of her neighbors hunting. Audra glanced back casually and saw something unbelievable. The fire had vanished, and in its place stood the dark silhouette of a man-shaped figure. Terrified, Audra and her friend ran as fast as they could, using the boulders and rocks as shelter to hide behind as they made their way to safety. That creature Audra saw could have easily been 10 feet tall, with the same glowing orange eyes and pointed head and red round face, but Audra and her friend were not close enough to see those kinds of details. The Fisher Farm encounter did have a red pulsing light, just like a fireball, like Audra and her friend saw. The town of Flatwoods is thriving on the local legend of the Flatwoods Monster. They even have a small little Flatwoods Monster museum, which I think was set up inside of a convenience store, and it's turned into more of a museum now. They also have an annual Flatwoods Day Festival where they commemorate the memory of the Flatwoods Monster. Their local county has even had 5 chairs painted like the Flatwoods Monster that you can go and sit in, take photos in, and I guess if you show all 5, they'll give you some stickers. You guys, I am starting to think that I should plan out some kind of Appalachian cryptid road trip and see all of these cool little towns, their little museums, their commemorative statues, chairs, and whatnot to these awesome cryptids. What do you think? Would you follow along if I took you on a road trip to see the cryptids of the Appalachia? Do you believe in the Flatwoods Monster? Let me know below. Thank you for watching another episode of Coffee and Cryptids with me. If you want to hear more about cryptids like this, hit like and subscribe so we can hang out more often. I post a new video every week. Stay weird, my friends. Okay, bye.